19-year-old Miles Naslund was reported missing by his family in 2011, but that was not the truth. Court heard Naslund's wife and sons led police on a wild goose chase, searching for someone they knew was dead. It all started on the family farm near Holden, Alberta. The victim's wife, Helen Naslund, admitted to shooting him twice in the back of the head while he slept. Helen enlisted the help of her son, 19-year-old Neil Naslund, to dispose of the body. According to an agreed statement of facts, throughout Miles and Helen's 27-year marriage, there were many instances of physical and emotional abuse. She pleaded guilty to manslaughter.
In the sprawling expanse of Alberta's rural heartland, where the prairie stretches endlessly under the vast open sky, lies the Naslund farmhouse, a silent witness to the enigmatic tale of a family's descent into darkness. At its core is Helen Naslund, a woman whose life story is shrouded in mystery, tragedy, and unanswered questions. Helen's journey began amidst the rolling fields of east-central Alberta, where she was raised as the youngest daughter of a dairy farmer. But beneath the veneer of rural tranquility lay a hidden world of familial discord and unspoken pain. What secrets lay buried within the walls of her childhood home, and what scars did she carry into adulthood? At 19, Helen's path crossed with that of Miles Naslund, a charismatic yet enigmatic figure whose allure masked a darker, more volatile nature. Their union marked the genesis of a tumultuous journey filled with love, conflict, and ultimately, tragedy. Behind closed doors, their marriage was a battleground of simmering tension and explosive outbursts. As the years passed, the cracks in their facade deepened, revealing the festering wounds of abuse and despair which lay hidden beneath. Despite her many attempts to break free from the cycle of violence, Helen found herself ensnared in a web of fear and isolation. What compelled her to endure years of torment, and what finally pushed her over the edge? The events of a fateful night in September 2011 would forever alter the course of the Naslund family's history and send shockwaves through their rural community. In the darkness of the night, the tranquility of the prairies was shattered by the sound of gunfire, a grim echo of the violence that had long simmered beneath the surface. What drove Helen to pull the trigger? And what demons haunted her in the moments before the fatal decision? As the veil of silence descended over the Naslund farmhouse in the aftermath of Miles' death, Helen and her sons grappled with the weight of their actions. Together, they would conspire to conceal the truth, burying their darkest secrets beneath layers of deceit and deception. What would drive a family to such drastic measures? And what price would they ultimately pay for their sins? Join us as we journey deep into the heart of this chilling story, unraveling the mysteries which lie beneath the surface and exploring the shadows where desperation meets darkness. Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to Memento Mori Stories. I'm Ella Favela, your guide through the shadows of human experience. If you're drawn to the darker corners of life, where coffee fuels creativity and tales of true crime send shivers down your spine, then you're definitely in the right place. Whether you're a seasoned listener or you're joining us for the first time, I'm thrilled to have you along for the ride. So grab a seat and let's dive into a chilling narrative. But before we descend into the depths, here's a little secret for you. If you thrive on stories that twist your perceptions and keep you on edge, hitting the subscribe button and ringing the notification bell is essential. With new content dropping bi-weekly, I would be honored to have you join us in the shadows. And hey, if you're curious about what goes on behind the scenes of my life, please join us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. I've always got something exciting going on over there, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. You'll find all the links conveniently located on screen, and they're clickable down below. I'm currently running a contest over on my Instagram at Memento Mori Art, where if you become my 250th follower, you will receive a custom painting by yours truly, delivered straight to your door, completely free of charge. It's my way of expressing gratitude for your support and welcoming you into our ever-growing community. Before we go any further, we need to talk about what lies ahead. We're diving into some weighty topics today, like domestic violence, assault, murder, and the intricate legal landscapes which surround these issues. These themes can be rather emotionally charged, so if you're feeling uneasy or if this hits way too close to home, it is absolutely okay to take a step back and skip this episode. Your mental and emotional well-being is my top priority. If you're grappling with these issues firsthand or you're carrying the weight of past trauma, please remember that you're not alone. You do have options. Whether it's skipping this segment altogether, reaching out to a trusted confidant, or seeking support from a professional, please remember that there are pathways to healing. In the description box below, I've compiled a list of resources and links that might offer you some assistance. It's crucial for me to emphasize that my intention is not to sensationalize nor to exploit the darker facets of human existence. We're here to shine a light on them, fostering empathy and understanding. By engaging in an open dialogue about these subjects, we aim to dismantle barriers and to reduce stigma, ultimately paving the way for healing on both a personal and societal front. Now, without further ado, let's embark on this journey together as we uncover the gripping tale of Helen Naslund.
People who travel through Camrose nearly always remark on the beauty of this central Alberta city. Its many memorable landmarks, parks, and wealth of recreation facilities leaves an impression that makes guests want to return and to stay. Whether on the highways passing through, meandering the civic streets, or walking the paths throughout the core, the vistas are fabulous. Camrose is often remembered for its parks and beauty, and the spectacular fountain in the center of the lake in the heart of the city. It's breathtaking, and you're invited to make Camrose your home.
Camrose is a charming city nestled in the heart of Alberta, Canada, offering a delightful blend of rural tranquility and urban vibrancy. Located approximately 100 kilometers or 62 miles southeast of Edmonton, and about 200 kilometers or 124 miles northeast of Calgary, my hometown, this picturesque destination is home to about 19,000 residents who enjoy its friendly community atmosphere and scenic surroundings. Situated centrally within the province, Camrose strikes the perfect balance between small-town charm and modern amenities. At the heart of Camrose lies the University of Alberta's Augustana campus, enriching the city's cultural landscape and offering educational opportunities to both residents and visitors. The local economy thrives on diverse sectors such as agriculture, education, healthcare, and retail, further enhanced by Camrose's strategic position as a hub for regional commerce and tourism. Surrounded by fertile farmlands and expansive prairies, Camrose provides abundant opportunity for outdoor recreation. Its multiple picturesque parks and green spaces beckon its residents and tourists alike to indulge in leisurely strolls, picnics, and various recreational activities throughout the year. The nearby Battle River adds to the city's allure, offering a serene backdrop for fishing, kayaking, and wildlife observation. Camrose's vibrant community spirit shines through its lively events and festivals, celebrating a range of themes from agriculture and music to cultural diversity. Residents take great pride in their city's welcoming atmosphere and strong sense of belonging, making Camrose an attractive destination for individuals seeking an enriching lifestyle amidst a supportive community. Helen Speed was only 17 years old when fate intertwined her path with that of Miles Naslund. It was the year 1981, and Helen had already spent a year navigating the world solo, having bolted from the confines of her family farm the moment she turned 16. Yearning for independence, she sought refuge in her work, craving to carve out a life of her very own. As the youngest of 8 siblings, Helen's upbringing had been a nomadic one, hopping from farm to farm alongside her family. Her encounters with romance had so far been scarce, save for a fleeting dalliance during her school days. Miles, on the other hand, was a seasoned 20-year-old with an allure that transcended his years. Their meeting, if it could be called that, was less of a chance encounter and more of Miles' relentless pursuit, as he would shadow her every step until she acquiesced to his advances. In the blink of an eye, Helen found herself entwined in Miles' world, spending her nights in his trailer within weeks of their meeting. Soon, he abandoned his abode, relocating to her apartment in town. Yet, amidst the whirlwind of newfound romance, unease crept into Helen's heart. She had reveled in her newfound independence and aspirations, dreaming of a career as a paramedic and of owning her own farm one day. A cautionary whisper from her cafe manager, a semblance of maternal concern, hinted at the disquiet brewing beneath the surface. Helen's intuition would mirror her friend's sentiments, sensing a dissonance between her and Miles. But attempts to sever their ties would only ignite Miles' fury, his desperation clinging to her like a suffocating shroud. Despite her apprehension, she found herself entangled in his web of manipulation and guilt, unable to break free from his hold. Their union would be sealed in a modest ceremony at a country hall, surrounded only by their immediate families. Helen harbored no illusions of perfection in their match, yet a shared dream of farming life would bind them together. The pair would venture to a place nestled between Holden and Daysland, a rural haven outside of Camrose. Amidst the idyllic backdrop of rolling fields and boundless skies, they would envision a future intertwined with the land, completely unaware of the tumultuous journey that lay just ahead. In 1984, just after Helen blew out the candles on her 20th birthday cake, little Wesley made his grand entrance into the Naslund Clan. Around the same time, the Leclercs, their next-door neighbors, would become like family. Corleen Leclerc, especially, she clicked with Helen, pulling her into the electrifying world of barrel racing. Together, they would tear up the local rodeo scene, their horses thundering around those barrels like nobody's business. For Helen, those rides were a breath of fresh air, a brief escape from the chaos awaiting her back home. But no matter how fast she would ride, she couldn't outrun the growing shadow of Miles' control. Then came that one day, after a rodeo outing, when Helen got back a little bit later than expected. And that's when hell broke loose. Miles, towering over Helen like a storm cloud, unleashed his fury in a way she had never seen before. It was a wake-up call, a brutal reminder that her fairy tale had taken a dark turn. From then on, it was like living in a pressure cooker. Miles would strip Helen of her horse, banning her from the rodeo and tightening his grip on her every move. But despite the mounting abuse, Helen couldn't bring herself to break free. She was traditional, trapped by vows she'd made when she was too young to know any better, and weighed down by the expectations of a world that simply did not understand. As the years rolled by, the Naslund brood grew with the addition of Daryl in 1988 and Neil in 1992. Helen would cling to the hopes that motherhood would somehow mend the cracks in her crumbling marriage. But instead, she found herself drowning in an ocean of chores and responsibilities, with Miles pushing her to her breaking point. With each passing day, Helen's dreams faded further into the background, drowned out by the harsh realities of farm life and domestic strife. As the divide between her dreams and her reality widened, she found herself wondering if she'd ever find her way back to the light. The violence that plagued Helen Naslund's life and that of her children's defies simple explanation. It wasn't just the physical brutality, although that was bad enough. It was also the constant barrage of threats, the relentless humiliation, and the suffocating control, which left scars deeper than anyone should have to bear. Day by day, the grip of Miles' dominance grew tighter, trapping Helen and her children in a nightmare from which they couldn't escape. Every move they made had to be accounted for, every action scrutinized under Miles' watchful eye. As the abuse escalated, Helen found herself sinking deeper into her own despair. With 3 young children depending on her, the idea of breaking free felt like an impossible dream. Where would they go? What would they do? The thought of reaching out to the police crossed Helen's mind, but she would quickly dismiss it. Even if they believed her, could they really protect her from Miles' wrath? Doubts gnawed at her, whispering cruel lies that maybe she deserved what was happening to her. Helen's sister, Sharon, had escaped her own abusive marriage, so she might have understood. But Helen couldn't bring herself to confide in her sister or anyone else for that matter. She felt utterly alone, burdened by secrets too dark to share. Even Corleen, her then best friend, eventually distanced herself from the chaos unfolding next door. She could hear Miles' angry outbursts echoing across the fields, a constant reminder of the danger lurking just beyond their peaceful community. As the years continued to roll on, the Naslund farm would expand to something out of a storybook. Hundreds of cows, clucking hens, and frolicking lambs, with fields stretching across a whopping 3,000 acres. But Miles? He was never satisfied. He was always pushing for more, for better. Helen and the boys worked themselves ragged, but it was never enough. Their struggle hit rock bottom when the bank came knocking, foreclosing on their property piece by piece. By 2011, they were down to their last patch of land, hanging on barely by a thread. Money was tighter than a pair of skinny jeans, so Helen took a job at A1 Rentals in Camrose. But even that would come with its own set of problems. As for Miles, well, he was spiraling. Booze became his best friend, and his temper was as volatile as a shaken soda can. His health took a nosedive after a bar brawl left him with a nasty head injury, making him even more unpredictable. And Helen? She was crumbling too. Multiple suicide attempts left her feeling like a shell of her former self, barely recognizable to her own children. But it wasn't just Helen feeling the heat. People outside the family had glimpsed the gun that Miles kept close, twirling it around like some Wild West gunslinger. The tension on the farm was thick enough to cut with a butter knife, and it was only getting worse. The weekend before Helen pulled the trigger on September 5th, 2011, Miles had been hitting the bottle hard, wielding his gun like some kind of twisted conductor. When a haying machine under Helen's care broke down, he didn't just lose his cool. He threw wrenches at her, spewing threats about her paying dearly for the equipment damage. At this point in our story, Wesley had already left home to start his own life, but Daryl and Neil were in the house, and subject not only to watching these events unfold, but also to being threatened and ordered around by their own father, who was not only inebriated, but heavily armed. Come Sunday dinner, Miles did not hold back. He tossed the entire meal and smashed the place settings to bits, ranting that the food wasn't even fit for a dog. His menacing behavior escalated as the day wore on, culminating in him passing out cold late that night. And then, in the quiet of the early morning, Helen made a fateful decision, pulling the trigger of a .22 caliber revolver at the back of Miles' head. Miles sprawled out on the bed in his underwear, his blood staining the sheets beneath him a deep shade of scarlet red. Helen knew logically that she should call the cops, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. It wasn't that simple. Miles had this intense hatred for the police, and he made sure that his children grew up feeling the same way. With no official record of the years of abuse that they had endured, Helen feared that their voices would go unheard and their plea for help would be dismissed. So, she came up with a plan. Assisted by her sons, they dragged Miles' lifeless body outside and crammed it into the oversized metal toolbox tucked away in the back of the truck. With meticulous precision, they drilled holes in the box, weighed it down, and welded it shut, sealing their dark secret within its confines. Beneath the cover of darkness, they navigated to the deepest corner of the dugout, the murky waters swallowing their burden whole. Next came the meticulous task of erasing any trace of Miles' existence. They buried his car with the aid of a backhoe, discarded his guns, and orchestrated his disappearance to mimic the tragic facade of a suicide. To cover their tracks completely, Helen would set the mattress and bedding on fire, watching as the flames licked at the night sky. The odd thing about Miles Naslund's disappearance was the lack of concern from those who knew him. Lawrence Wepler and Patricia Hogue, once close to Miles and Helen, speculated that he might have headed north to end his life in the muskeg. Helen's sister Sharon breathed a deep sigh of relief at his absence. Even Guy Turnbull, Helen's boss and confidant, harbored his suspicions, but kept them to himself. The police were in no hurry either, taking 2 days to even bother taking statements. There was no search party. There were no missing posters plastered around town. Some locals, privy to the goings-on at the farm, felt that whatever had happened to Miles was long overdue. Corleen would later remark that nobody gave a damn.
Not a soul.
Except maybe his mother. Life seemed brighter and easier for Helen without him. She rediscovered her love of barrel racing, getting herself 2 horses, and hitting the rodeo circuit again. But Miles' absence didn't equate to freedom for Helen. She would drown her memories in alcohol, haunted by that evening. Occasionally, she would press the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, for updates on the case, unable to shake her unease. Guy Turnbull noticed the flicker of apprehension in Helen's eyes at the mere mention of a rumor regarding Miles' body. He would keep his suspicions close, a secret he never shared, not even with his wife. For 6 years, life would settle into an uneasy calm. Then, One blistering summer day in 2017, as Helen toiled away at A1 Rentals, two men approached her, badges gleaming in the sun. And in that moment, it felt like chaos had come knocking once again. In a cramped room at the RCMP detachment, Constable Derek Carlson's voice cut through the tension. "Helen, you're not a bad person," he assured her amidst the stark surroundings. They were facing the aftermath of 6 years since Helen had reported her husband missing. The officers had picked her up at her workplace, telling her they had a new witness in Miles' disappearance. As they spoke, Helen perched on the edge of her seat, her leg dangling outside. Though they didn't slap handcuffs on her right then and there, the cops had already descended upon the farm, scouring every nook and cranny for clues. Helen had a hunch that it was Daryl who spilled the beans. Crushed by guilt, he had told the story to a few acquaintances. He then provided a statement to the RCMP on August 31st, 2017. Sure enough, the RCMP would unearth Miles' crushed Chevy and a stash of firearms nearby. But the pièce de résistance lay at the bottom of the dugout on the Naslund property. Miles' lifeless form, a grim tableau of plastic bag and bullet-riddled skull. When the police amassed enough evidence to press charges, Helen and Neil surrendered themselves at the Camrose detachment. Wesley got pinched at work.
The victim's wife, Helen Naslund, admitted to shooting him twice in the back of the head while he slept. Helen enlisted the help of her son, 19-year-old Neil Naslund, to dispose of the body. Neil admitted to tossing his dad's body in a metal truck box, transporting it to a boat, and dumping it in a dugout on the property.
"We can't turn back the clock," Constable Carlson lamented. "We can't hand you a lifeline or whisk you off to safety. Why didn't you leave the farm?" "I tried," Helen insisted. Wesley was 16 then, with a driver's license and an old Chevy truck at his disposal. The escape plan was hastily thrown together, but Miles' untimely return foiled their flight. It was one of those memories Helen had tucked away, sealed tight to prevent its resurfacing. Neil would recall his father's suffocating grip around Helen's throat, a cruel act amplified by the sound of his brothers on the other side of the door, hostages to Miles' fury and firearm. From then on, Helen knew that leaving Miles meant courting death not only for herself, but for her boys. Wesley Naslund painted a grim picture of his childhood, revealing that his father's violence began at a young age. Recalling his adolescence, he described the home environment as being akin to tiptoeing through a minefield, where any misstep would set off his father's explosive temper. Coming home from school was like walking into an interrogation room, he recounted. Every conversation, every interaction would be scrutinized. He recounted hushed Saturday morning cartoon sessions, fearful of waking their hungover father, who often lounged in his recliner with a gun in reach. Sometimes when he was drunk, he'd talk about ending it all, Wes recalled, his voice tinged with resignation. The precarious financial state of the farm would only heighten tensions, amplifying the strain on the family. Wesley would also recall his mother's attempt to flee when he was just 16. She came out of their bedroom, tears streaming down her face, and she whispered, "I can't leave. He said he'll hunt me down and kill me." Wesley would recount this story with anguish evident in his words and tears in his eyes. The RCMP had the case sewn up tight. They laid out Daryl's damning statements, but Helen sensed that they already had all of the pieces. The only thing left was to point a finger on who pulled the trigger. Despite Daryl's betrayal, Helen found solace in the truth finally emerging. Concealing that secret was a burden far heavier than the events of that night. "I believe you did what you had to do to end the torment," Constable Carlson would offer empathetically. "You're not a cold-blooded killer, Helen. Tell me if I'm wrong. Am I?" "I'm not a monster," she affirmed, facing the trio of interrogators. "I just wanted the pain to stop." "I shot him," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. Confession secured, Helen requested to lie down, and the officers would oblige, escorting her back to her cell. Helen and Neil faced charges of first-degree murder and indignity to human remains, and Wesley found himself charged with accessory after the fact. He would spend a week behind bars before being granted bail, and records indicate that the charge was stayed on September 13, 2018. During the sentencing hearings in October 2020, the Crown and the defense reached an agreement for an 18-year sentence in a joint submission. The maximum penalty for manslaughter is life imprisonment, with a minimum of 4 years if a firearm is involved. Notably, no victim impact statements would be presented to the courts, nor would Ms. Naslund speak during these proceedings. Prosecutor Dallas Sopko described the crime as leaning towards the, quote, near murder end of the manslaughter spectrum. He stated that there were no previous reports of domestic violence involving the Naslund family to his knowledge. Sopko emphasized the challenges of uncovering domestic issues, acknowledging the complexities of the relationship between the victim, in this case, Miles, and the accused. "I don't want to downplay what occurred. It was grave. The victim had loved ones deeply concerned about him. It's a tragedy all around," Sopko remarked. Wesley Naslund doubted that sharing his perspective would or could alter the outcome for his mother or his younger brother. "I just wanted people to know about the abuse," he expressed. "A lifetime of it leading up to that moment. It won't change anything, but it can offer a true understanding." Justice Sterling Sanderman's characterization of the case as a, quote, callous, cowardly act on a vulnerable victim in his own home by a partner was hard for Wesley to accept. The prosecution mentioned that he lost the feeling of safety in his own home. "That may be true, but my mother likely lost that notion months after they married," Wesley would later reflect. Darren Sprake, Naslund's lawyer, acknowledged considering the battered woman defense, but ultimately concluded that it wasn't applicable in her case. Elizabeth Sheehy, a University of Ottawa professor emerita of law, highlights that since 1990, courts have permitted women accused of killing abusive partners to invoke battered woman syndrome as a form of self-defense. Helen's 18-year sentence stands out as one of the lengthiest in Canada for a manslaughter case involving an abused woman, according to Sheehy. In her analysis, the majority of women receive 2 years or less, with only 19 women receiving federal sentences, with the longest being 10 years. In her book, Defending Battered Women on Trial, Sheehy examined 91 cases involving abused women from 1990 to 2005. Out of these cases, 49 resulted in guilty pleas, similar to Helen's case, with 18 of them receiving suspended sentences or house arrest. Sheehy notes that the element of deceit in Naslund's case likely influenced the severity of her sentence. Nevertheless, she remarked, it's an exceptionally long sentence for this type of case. Domestic homicides are unfortunately not uncommon in Canada, with women being much more frequently victimized than acting as the perpetrator. In 2011, 76 women lost their lives at the hands of their domestic partners, making up over 40% of the country's female homicide victims. Conversely, of the 422 men who fell victim to homicide that year, only 13 were allegedly killed by their partners, accounting for a mere 3%. Moreover, an even smaller fraction of this group would have been killed by women in potential acts of self-defense. The landmark case that solidified the battered woman defense in Canada is one we have covered in a previous episode, which I will link in the description of this video for you to consider as well. In the summer of 1986, Angelique Lynn Lavallee, then 22 years old, fatally shot her husband, Kevin Rust, in the back of the head following an altercation at their residence in Winnipeg. Despite shooting him from behind, which traditionally did not align with self-defense laws, a jury comprising of 11 men and 1 woman would acquit her of both murder and manslaughter charges due to the abuse she had endured. This verdict was unanimously upheld by the Supreme Court. In her 1990 decision, Bertha Wilson, the court's inaugural female justice, would emphasize that the conventional, reasonable man standard for self-defense was inadequate in cases involving women defending themselves against their abusers. Wilson argued that the circumstances of domestic violence, including the history of abuse and the constrained ability of women to safely escape, necessitate a much different legal approach. Helen's 18-year sentence would spark nationwide outrage. A petition demanding the overturning of her sentence garnered over 27,000 signatures, with supporters expressing solidarity and calling for legal reforms to better understand the plight of abused women. The hashtag #StandWithHelen would gain traction on social media, amplifying support from women's shelters, activists, and individuals nationwide. In prison, Helen felt isolated, unsure of the public response to her case. Initially, her first lawyer had planned to go to trial, but after many health issues, Darren Sprake took over and negotiated the manslaughter plea deal. Despite practical reasons for accepting the bargain, Helen would question if she made the right choice. With encouragement from advocates like Senator Kim Pate and Dr. Elizabeth Sheehy, Helen would contemplate appealing her sentence. Dr. Sheehy saw parallels between Helen's case and her research on battered women, noting the systemic failure to recognize the impact of abuse on their actions. This support from influential figures left Helen feeling bewildered but very hopeful. Despite being reluctant to raise her expectations, she would agree to consult with a new lawyer, opening herself up to the possibility of a better outcome. At Dawson, Duckett, Garcia, and Johnson Criminal Law in downtown Edmonton, Mona Duckett and her colleagues would strategize Helen's appeal. Mona, a highly respected senior lawyer, faced the daunting task of challenging a sentence agreed upon by both sides. Despite the competence of the lawyers and judge involved, public outcry over perceived injustice pushed her to take on the case. With experience in cases of battered women, Mona understood the unique challenges these individuals face. Long-term abuse often leads to cognitive issues and learned helplessness, which makes it difficult for victims to engage with the legal system. In Helen's case, male-dominated proceedings further complicated matters. Despite disparities in sentencing for similar cases nationwide, Helen's sentence stood out for its severity. In May 2021, Mona filed an appeal arguing that Helen's sentence undermined public interest and the administration of justice. Her submission highlighted the gender bias inherent in evaluating the actions of a battered woman. Supporting materials included an affidavit from Dr. Sheehy, Matthew Barron's position, and letters from organizations like the Canadian Femicide Observatory and the Camrose Women's Shelter Society, emphasizing the systemic issues at play. In January 2022, Alberta Court of Appeal Justice Sheila Grekel deemed the original 18-year sentence for Helen Naslund as excessively severe, highlighting the fact that it failed to consider the context of her abusive marriage. Grekel suggested that the Alberta courts should reevaluate their approach to cases like Naslund's, acknowledging the unique circumstances surrounding battered women who resort to extreme measures due to abusive relationships. In a pivotal ruling, the court would slash Helen's sentence in half, reducing it to 9 years. She emphasized the need for Alberta courts to reevaluate their handling of cases like Naslund's. It is long overdue for this court to acknowledge that cases involving battered women who kill their abusive partners present distinct circumstances that demand the sentencing judge's consideration, especially in cases involving battered woman syndrome, she stated. Elizabeth Sheehy noted that even with the reduced sentence of 9 years, it remains lengthy compared to what other abused women convicted of manslaughter have received. Nonetheless, she emphasized that the reduction of the sentence, agreed upon by both defense and prosecution, represents a significant legal precedent. The original sentence must cause the reasonable observer to lose faith in the justice system or conflict with public interest, she explained. So it's a pivotal decision, not only for Helen personally, but also for other abused women navigating the criminal justice system. During the initial sentencing, Justice Sterling Sanderman suggested that Naslund had alternatives to shooting her abusive spouse. However, Justice Grekel dismissed this notion as outdated thinking, a sentiment echoed by Dr. Sheehy. It's disconnected from the realities of leaving a violent partner, Sheehy remarked, emphasizing the complex challenges faced by abused women. Jan Reimer, the executive director of the Alberta Council of Women's Shelters, concurred, highlighting the pervasive isolation tactics employed by abusers. This isolation makes seeking help immensely difficult for victims. Even if an abuse victim manages to escape, abusers find ways to reconnect, especially if children are involved, Sheehy explained. This dynamic underscores the urgent need for societal interventions to better support victims and prevent further harm. In response, Minister of Justice David Lametti's office stressed the commitment to combating gender-based violence and ensuring fair treatment within the justice system. Sheehy advocates for reforming mandatory minimum sentences for murder, which could alleviate the pressure on abused women facing legal proceedings. Reimer emphasized the importance of community vigilance and support for victims, urging communities to recognize and to respond to signs of domestic violence without resorting to victim blaming or shame. Plans for Helen's parole release are already underway. She will reside with her sister, Sharon, in a cozy room in Camrose. Guy Turnbull, her old boss, ensures that her job at A1 remains secure, providing unwavering support to the family and even covering her legal fees. Her friend Corleen eagerly anticipates rekindling Helen's passion for horse racing, envisioning a future where they'll hit the rodeo tracks together once more. I believe she'll find true freedom, Corleen asserts. She deserves the best life. Despite lingering doubts from some in her old circles who struggle to reconcile the gentle Helen with the act of taking a life, Helen herself grapples with understanding her own actions. Tears welling in her eyes, she reflects, "I wish things had turned out differently. Maybe there was another way. But after everything I endured, years of abuse, there comes a breaking point." I guess I reached mine. This landmark decision not only offers hope for Helen, but also sets a precedent for the fair treatment of abused women within the Canadian justice system. It signals a critical shift towards recognizing the complexities of domestic abuse cases and underscores the importance of understanding the unique circumstances faced by victims of intimate partner violence. As the legal landscape continues to evolve, it's imperative that such changes pave the way for greater empathy, understanding, and support for survivors like Helen Naslund. I stand with Helen and with all other survivors of domestic abuse. If you're facing domestic abuse, please know that you're not alone and that there is help available. Your safety and well-being are of the utmost importance. Remember that you deserve to live a life without fear and violence, and know that there are people who care about your well-being and who want to support you. You have the right to seek help and to pursue a life free from abuse. In the description box of this video, I've compiled a range of resources and helpful links that I personally found useful when leaving my own abuser. I encourage you to explore them. You are capable of overcoming this challenge, and I believe in you wholeheartedly. As we conclude this chapter, let us carry forward the lessons learned and continue the fight against domestic violence in all of its forms. Together, we can work towards creating a world where every individual feels safe, valued, and empowered to live without fear. The painting I've been working on today is called Memoris Acti Prudentis Futuri, mindful of things done, aware of things to come. And as of the time of recording this voiceover, May 1st, 2024, I have, of course, once again, only just begun. As of right now, I only have the pencil sketch finished, so I have really no idea how long this piece will take me, but I'm into it about 4 hours right now, and I'll put the total elapsed time on the screen for the curious. It's 9 by 12 inches and will be composed of some combination of watercolor and gouache paint, Posca pen, India ink, and gilding foil on 300 GSM 140-pound cold-pressed block. This painting will be available for sale, as well as many of my other original works. And my books are actually currently open to custom commissioned work as well. I ship art for free across Canada, but I'm happy to ship globally for a nominal fee as well. I will be announcing my next print drop very soon. That's right. There will be a limited run of 19 images available in 3 different sizes for you to add to your collection in the very near future. Make sure to follow me on social media to be the first to know when they'll be available and for instructions on how to order them. I've also recently opened my books to offer graphic design and branding consultations for serious clients. If any of that sounds interesting to you, please send an email to hello@stageleftproject.ca. If you believe in the power of conversation, in dismantling the silence which shrouds domestic abuse, and in fostering empathy, then I invite you to become a part of the Memento Mori Stories community. Subscribe to our channel to stay engaged with thought-provoking stories, discussions, and creative expressions. Together, we can be a force for awareness, understanding, and healing. Your subscription is so much more than just a click. It's a pledge to be a part of a movement which embraces the power of storytelling to bring about positive change. Remember, every voice matters, and yours can be a catalyst for good. Subscribe, share, and let's continue this journey together. Remember, one day you will die, but for now, live well. Ciao for now.